The Green Ops podcast is brought to you by F3 Tactical, Spotter Up, Sons of Liberty Gunworks, and Blue Force Gear.
So strength training is certainly a work of voluntary hardship. And what we found with strength training is it's very general. So it works for almost everybody. I mean, I would say literally everybody, unless you're, I don't know, a quadriplegic or something. I mean, almost anybody can train. Everybody, there's a lot of people that we deal with that think they can't train. I've got a bad back, I've got a bad knees, whatever it is. We can talk about that if we want to at some point. But the reality is you've got to be able to work. What are you going to get weaker and weaker and weaker and let your back keep getting worse and, less resilient to injury and whatnot. And so we don't want to do that. So certainly there are things you can do to train that invokes voluntary hardship. And I think it's the same. I've done quite a bit of firearm training. I mean, some of the most effective firearm training is when you're doing it in the heat, when you're doing it in the cold, when you're doing it under lactate threshold. So when in that time period, when you start to get the breathing catch, and I still have to perform, and I'm like I'm getting lactic acid, basically, what people under extreme fatigue, under a scenario where you might be losing consciousness. Like when I train those ways, then I've prepared myself that when I get caught in that situation in real life, like, okay, I've been there. We want training to be harder than it would be in real life. As much as we can do those things where you put yourself, like you said, be comfortable with the uncomfortable, be okay with doing these things like extreme heat, extreme cold, under extreme fatigue, heart rate at 185. Like, can you still perform? Whether that's squatting, lifting, whether that's firing your firearm or any kind of tactical training or medical rescue or whatever. Those panic is the worst thing that can happen in those situations. And so to be able to keep your wits about you, that has to come from at least trying to simulate that in training. Right now, certainly you can't fully simulate real bullets whizzing by your head, but we can do the best we can to put ourselves, and certainly if we put ourselves in that situation, we can better handle it when it really occurs, better than someone who's never been through it, right? One of the things we see all the time with people who lift, after they lift and they go through our program for, say, a couple months, the lifting is actually not that heavy, and they can handle, they can complete their lifts relatively easily for a while. And then they get a couple months in and they get their first like really heavy day, let's say. And we're talking about just going up a little bit at a time, but say Monday, they were squatting something and it was like just not that hard. And then we added 5 more pounds. They come in on Wednesday and it is just like brutal. And maybe they didn't sleep well the night before or whatever. Your brain has a governor on it that says, don't do this, right? You start to deadlift. It almost always happens in the deadlift first. The deadlift starts on the, deadlift for, I assume most of your listeners are going to know, but you're just picking up a barbell off the floor. You're standing up with it, right? And because it starts from a dead stop, hence the name a deadlift, people will start to pick up a heavy deadlift and they'll start to pull on it and their brain will be like, don't do this. You're going to hurt your back. Don't do this. And they'll just put it down and go, nope. And then we have to have this sort of come to Jesus talk. We have to walk them through like, hey, here's why you have to give me 5 seconds of grind. Because that's where voluntary hardship comes in, right? You can pull this. It's not, you did 5 pounds less than this the other day. It was no problem whatsoever. And so that's the focus of that voluntary hardship. We're just trying to train voluntarily. And there's something about that voluntary piece. Like even, I don't know that you can even get that. Like when you're in the military and your drill instructor is forcing you to do the thing, or you're in wrestling in high school and your coach is making you do the thing, the hard workout, running the stairs, running the bleachers, whatever. Like certainly you can be refined, by the way, by involuntary hardship. We see some people refined by going to prison, but boy, we see a lot of people not refined by going to prison. Right. And so there is something magical about when you choose all for yourself to do a thing that's really hard that no one else is going to make you do. No one's going to wake you up at 5 a.m. and make you go work out. That's a choice that you have to make. And when you make that choice, there is a refining thing that happens, right? I don't think it's I think there are other things in your life that refine you and make you better. I think improving your marriage makes you better. I think getting out of debt makes you better. I think, there are all these things that can be done. I'm in the business of strength training. And I know that strength training, that voluntary hardship will refine people and make them better. And a lot of that is just because they have to choose to do it on their own. You can't force anybody to do this, not long term. And once you've done it for a sustainable amount of time, not for, hey, I'm excited for 3 weeks, but I've done this for 2 years, 3 years, even 6 months. You've at that point walked through the refining power of voluntary hardship.
Complete episode available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. New Green Ops podcast episodes available every Thursday. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the new content.